I think that we are adapting to a new normal until a safe and effective vaccine becomes widely accessible to the majority of the world's population. And I'm afraid until that happens, we are going to be looking at perhaps more than a couple of waves of this pandemic sweeping through our respective populations.
So in today's video, I want to talk about the supposed stockpiling of food by states and governments around the world. Okay, so there's a story which has been circulating within the preparedness community for the last week or so about governments secretly stockpiling food. Now, one of the channels that is promoting this idea is promoting it as that the government is secretly doing this, but the reality is there's nobody secretly doing anything. Okay, there's one state, as far as I know, and that's Washington State, who is stockpiling food, but it's for the purpose of people who are struggling with food insecurity in that state. And apparently that's like 1/3 of the population. Apparently Washington not doing too good right now. So that's why they're stockpiling food. Now, I think the main reason why they're stockpiling food is because of the potential for a second wave. Now, according to one of the world's foremost infectious disease researchers, a second wave is a statistical certainty, meaning that in years gone by, in pandemics previous to this, there always has been a second wave, and he's predicting that there's likely going to be an actual second wave, not a resurgence of the first wave like we've seen in the States, where you had states which weren't initially impacted by the first leg of the outbreak, impacted later on. But what we've seen so far, and it's my intuition that we are definitely going to see a second wave, because, you know, initially back in February or whatever it was, we thought there was 15 cases. Some people thought it was just going to go away. Of course, it didn't go away. It grew exponentially. And of course, the US became the leader of COVID cases around the world. Then when it started to die down, people were uncertain as to whether or not there was going to be a resurgence if we opened back up. Sure enough, there was almost a twofold increase in cases a little over a month after the initial reopening. So I think it's safe to say that once the kids go back to school in the fall, and once people get more active, and then you throw flu season on top of that, the fact that more people are going to be indoors more because the weather is going to start getting colder, people's immune systems aren't going to be as good. I think it would be foolish for us not to presume that there would be a second wave. The question is how virulent and how contagious it's going to be. Now, according to the latest research I've seen, the virus is becoming more contagious, but not necessarily more lethal. So more contagious, meaning it's going to infect more people. And so we're likely to see it infect people who are perhaps impervious to it throughout that first wave become infected in the second wave. So I think it's great if states are stockpiling food. The only state that I can find information on who's doing that right now, of course, is Washington State. I'm sure there are others being a little bit proactive, or at least I'd hope, but I wouldn't bet on it because we're talking about governments here. Governments' budgets are already stretched very thin as a result of much lower tax revenues this year. So, you know, having to trim a lot of services. I highly doubt that a lot of governments are going to be so proactive to start stockpiling food. It's likely that they're going to be scrambling once again at the last minute because we're in the eye of the storm, as I've said, and people have grown very complacent already. What you see behind me here is gas masks, filters, because I know that come November, or maybe even October, these things are going to be in short supply once again. And food is going to be in short supply. That's why we're stocking up here at Canadian Preparedness on MREs, freeze-dried food, those types of things, because we know that, you know, come the end of the year, these things are going to be in high demand. Now, we don't change our prices just because things are in greater demand. I don't believe in profiting off of, you know, people's misfortune. But if inflation keeps up, which I think is the reason for the rising food price, I can guarantee you that there has been a huge rise in food price over the past year. I've seen Mountain House food, for instance, go up almost between 25 to 35%, I would say, in the past year. And if, for those of you who don't know, that's freeze-dried food. It takes a lot of energy to make it. But that shouldn't be a problem because, of course, the price of oil is going down. So I think one thing which is offsetting the price of food going up through the roof is the fact that oil is cheaper right now. So gasoline is cheaper. So agriculture is a bit cheaper right now. But because of all the food insecurity around the world, the lockdowns, of course, have put more stress on the food systems. There's certainly going to be a spike in food price. Will we see actual food shortages like was feared earlier in the year? It's hard to say. It could very well take that form again because remember, we're still catching up. All the supply chains, as far as I know, are just catching up to the lag which was had as a result of the lockdowns and the panic buying that took place earlier in the year. So if anything, now is the time to get ahead of it. And that's why I just ordered 5 pallets of MREs, not for myself, obviously, but for the store. We just ordered Mountain House. We got some Peak Refuel coming in, Happy Yak, basically all of the big foodstuffs. Because for me, food is probably one of the best investments, particularly freeze-dried food, because if you think about freeze-dried food, and I've tried to make this argument before, is that let's say you have a freeze-dried food like Mountain House that lasts 25 years. Now, the price per calorie is going to be very high today. But if you project that 10, 15, even 20 years out, when that food is still going to be perfectly palatable and suitable for consumption, the price of food come that time to buy a package of Mountain House at the store is probably going to be double, if not triple, if you're even going to be able to buy it with dollars at all. If we're still trading in dollars, if that's still the reserve currency, or if we switched over to something else, or if there's a new world currency or a cryptocurrency, whatever the case might be, the price for that commodity is likely going to increase. So if you have food which can last a long period of time, chances are you're going to beat inflation on that food. So food, that non-perishable food in particular, is something that really doesn't depreciate. It only appreciates in value, whereas a lot of consumables are going to actually depreciate. So like I said, if you have the world's foremost infectious disease control practitioner saying that, you know, it's a statistical certainty that this second wave is going to happen, then whether or not you think the virus is a major threat to you, you need to understand that there's going to be repercussions throughout the supply chain, simply because there's going to be a lot of people who are impacted by it. Maybe you won't be impacted by it. Maybe none of your family, hopefully, will be impacted by it, but somebody's will. And there's going to be a lot of people who are taking precautions and trimming down their hours and trimming down their productivity, which is ultimately going to have dire economic consequences. Now, once again, right now, the economy appears to be soaring higher and higher, still trading sideways and a little bit on the up and up, which, like I say, kind of defies common sense and defies logic at this point, which is why I'm becoming more and more convinced of my theory that a lot of the inflation in the market right now is just being buried in the stock market, because people are being forced to invest so that they're not losing on these incredibly low interest rates and the debasement of the currency as a result of the quantitative easing. So I do think that at some point this economy has to level out, and the reality is going to smack people in the face. But let's hope it doesn't. Let's hope all goes well, and let's hope that we don't have a second wave. I mean, that would be ideal. I think we've all endured enough so far in 2020. But I think so far this virus has proven to be highly contagious and highly infectious. And if we were to just hope that a second wave is not going to come, then I think it would be very foolish to do so. It's likely it's not just going to burn itself out. It's likely it's going to morph into something else. I can't remember exactly how many cases worldwide there are now, probably 100 million at least. I know there's 5 million in the United States. And I did hear a study, and I'm not sure how up to date this is anymore, but that the asymptomatic spread was not as much of a factor as they initially thought it was. Now, that might sound like a good thing, but what that also means is that there's not as many asymptomatic carriers out there as were initially thought. Therefore, that means that there's a lot of people who are still susceptible to this virus. Now, we do have the Russians who are claiming that they've created a vaccine. As far as I know, I've heard the FDA, the former FDA chair, Scott Gottlieb, the guy who now works for Pfizer, no conflict of interest there. Regardless, these biotech firms in the United States, they're not behind the Russians. The Russians aren't doing anything more expedient than the American firms. It's just that the Russians are bypassing a few of the final steps to ensure that this is actually going to be a safe vaccine to take. 3 weeks ago, if you remember the news reports, the Russians were boasting that they were going to be the first ones with a vaccine. And of course, I think they wanted to deliver that. Many people are still very skeptical about their ability to scale that in mass, and of course, whether or not it's actually safe. But more importantly, whether or not it's going to actually be effective. A lot of sources that I've read are saying that it's only going to be temporarily effective, that the antibodies that it produces are only going to be short term. So it might give you partial immunity for a few months, but not indefinite immunity. And we all know what that means. That means you're going to have to get another shot every 6 months to a year. Now, who's going to be the first person to line up for this experimental? Well, I guess it wouldn't be experimental by the time it gets released, but who are the people going to be who are lining up for it? I don't know, because everybody I've talked to about it is quite skeptical. So I think that is going to be another major divide within not only the political sphere, but just the social spheres of people who are for getting the vaccine and those who are not. So it's going to be interesting to see how that is going to play out. And of course, now you have Joe Biden, who just selected Kamala Harris as his VP. And apparently Wall Street likes that idea. So it's going to be an interesting battle, political battle, come next month. So for all of these reasons, I think getting ahead of the curve right now, literally, never has that phrase been more relevant than right now. Getting ahead of the curve right now, getting your personal protective equipment now, getting your food locked in right now, and planning for the fact that once the kids go back to school, that's when the spreading is really going to start, because we know how kids are. They're not going to be washing their hands all the time. You can social distance as much as you want. Schools are going to be incubators for disease, whether we like it or not, no matter what we do. Unless, they're able to really enforce some really strict protocols, I think that that's going to be the outcome ultimately. I mean, common sense would dictate you have an infectious disease, you're sending the kids back to school in most places, shit's going to hit the fan one more time. So I think the time to get ahead of the curve is now, guys. Like I said, this whole business about states secretly preparing for food insecurity, it's true to an extent, but it's also not true. It's not a secret. They're preparing to feed their poor populations. They didn't say anything about the fact that they're preparing for a second wave, but I do suspect that that's probably a factor as well. And of course, this is limited to Washington State. But I'm quite certain that the military, who was talking about a second wave months ago, has been long since preparing for this eventuality. I'm sure that FEMA and agencies like that are gearing up for something of this magnitude that I'm talking about today. So I think it's only prudent that you take it upon yourself to get it ahead of the curve once again, so you don't have to get stuck standing outside a Costco for 2 hours social distancing, right? And then have to go through that whole rigmarole. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think about, the food insecurity in the coming months. Obviously, there's a lot of strain and stress being put on the system by many countries throughout the world who are struggling as a result of this. And of course, that's going to drive up food prices. Like I said, Mountain House price is through the roof. MRE prices are through the roof. all of the emergency foods are going up, and Mountain House has only recently caught up on orders. And as far as I know, the last order that came into to Canada anyways has come in for the year. So whatever remains now is basically what's going to remain. Scoop it up while you can, but for most of you, go watch my last video, Top 10 Survival Foods. There's plenty of far more cost-effective options that I would encourage you to explore first. Make those your staples and make these other foods that I was talking about today kind of just accessories and luxury items that, you know, they're going to spice up your life a little bit should you have to shelter in place once again. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoy the video, Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com. Your one-stop shop for premium, high-quality, brand-name products that have been tried and tested by myself and other YouTube gear reviewers. My subscribers save 10% off by using the coupon code SURVIVALPREPPER. All one word in all caps.